UNFCCC. This came out of COP27 when delegates said, we want a technical workshop about delivering a gender-responsive, just transition for all. And 1 year later, here we are. This day, oh my goodness, so packed. We have keynotes, special guest speakers, we have lightning talks, the Q&A, questions are here, answers hopefully are here, but I really think they're probably all in the entire room, which is what happens with a workshop. And then after lunch, we have a special keynote, plus we have breakout workshops so that your recommendations come into the ILO's paper, so that when we get to Gender Day, which is just 24 hours away, your recommendations of what happened in this workshop is in that gender document and the ILO's recommendations. So we have a lot to do. My name is Femi Oke. I am your moderator for the entire day. I have to do things like tell you how many languages I will be heard in. Okay, English on channel number 1, French on channel number 2, Spanish on channel number 3, Arabic on 4, and you should see on this screen, if you read International Sign Language and that is useful for you, it will be on this screen. So if you want to be on this side of the room, that will be very helpful for the International Sign Language. There is so much for us to do today, so I really want us to get started with Ms. Celeste Drake. She's the Deputy Director General of the International Labour Organization. Deputy Director General, it is good to have you. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, employers, workers, fellow UN colleagues, private sector, and nonprofit advocates for equality and inclusion for a just transition and climate action. I'm honored to deliver remarks at the outset of this full day of dialogue co-organized by the ILO and the UNFCCC. As you well know, the world is facing compounding challenges. First and foremost, the existential crisis of climate change, alongside major demographic transitions, armed conflicts, the penetration of artificial intelligence into our daily lives, and frankly, a growing dissatisfaction and distrust toward public institutions. If this distrust is not resolved, it will impede our ability to address the challenges that we are discussing today. These multiple and concurrent crises create uncertainty, instability, and unpredictability, impacting our livelihoods profoundly and affecting some regions and populations more than others. On a more positive outlook, the ILO estimates that 1.2 billion, that's billion with a B, Jobs globally depend upon a stable climate and the ecosystem services that we are collectively working to protect, and that up to 24 million jobs will be created through 2030 through energy-related measures alone. So there's a lot of upside as well. And staying positive, the transition to low-carbon, climate-resilient economies can be a very important driver of growth. However, measures for decarbonizing economies and increasing climate change resilience will have extensive implications for the structure of economies and labor markets, affecting communities, workers, and enterprises across all sectors. In this intricate web of transformations that we must achieve, there is a grave risk that not all groups will gain equally or equitably from the transition, and that some may be negatively impacted. Inequalities could be reinforced rather than reduced. Women in the labor market already face persistent gaps in employment, social protection, pay, working conditions, decision-making spaces, and the challenge of unpaid cross-generational care work. Right now, young women are particularly penalized as their participation in the labor market still lags behind pre-COVID levels, raising concerns about intergenerational gender inequality. Transitioning towards a greener economy does not automatically bridge current gender inequalities. Climate and just transition policies must be intentionally designed to be gender transformative in their implementation and in their impact. Transitioning to greener economies is a unique opportunity to reshape and disrupt existing norms and practices that disadvantage women, Indigenous and tribal peoples, persons with disabilities, and others who experience discrimination in the current economy. Governments must seize this opportunity to transform all of these at once. By addressing the gender and equality dimensions of environmental challenges and opportunities, just transition policies and programs can minimize social, economic, and environmental risks while supporting greater inclusion, diversity, and equity. A gender transformative approach to employment in the green transition involves concerted efforts in gender-responsive macroeconomics and developmental policies, industrial, sectoral, enterprise, and skills policies that are supported by an enabling environment for gender equality, including rights and provision of care, occupational safety and health, and of course, social protection. Voice and representation of women through freedom of association and in social dialogue, including collective bargaining, is essential to ensuring that women and different population groups are actively involved in making the decisions that affect them. Women's agency is crucial to a just transition. Women's expertise, skills, and networks can be the foundation of sustainable solutions. In shaping the green economy of the present and the future, it is essential to center care in just transition policies and strategies. Care jobs, including in education, health, social work, and other spaces, should gain more recognition as green jobs, as they are low in carbon and greenhouse gases, and also promote the preservation, restoration, and enhancement of environmental quality. They contribute to sustainability by influencing environmental consciousness in our new generations and in society overall. Investing in the care sector and improving working conditions not only provides sustainable employment, but is also pivotal in enabling women to enter and advance in traditionally male-dominated sectors, including those in the clean energy sector. In June this year, the International Labor Conference, which is made up of governments, employers, and workers, from the 187 member states of the ILO unanimously adopted a historic resolution and conclusions on just transition. Just to reemphasize, this is a space where governments, workers, and employers came together unanimously to make these recommendations, so they're critically important. The resolution emphasizes the need for a strong gender and inclusive dimension, highlighting the central role of employment and social policies in conjunction with financing, human rights, migration, indigenous rights, and youth dimensions. The resolution and conclusions on just transition are a powerful connector between the urgently needed net zero policies and gender transformative and inclusive just transition policies. To conclude, achieving a just transition and promoting gender equality are intrinsically linked and mutually reinforcing. They are foundational to social justice, and it is this justice that will help build popular support for effective climate policies. As we move forward, it is imperative to translate these resolutions into tangible, on-the-ground action. Bridging the gap between narrative and reality requires unprecedented commitments, collective engagement, and bold political leadership. It requires building a low-carbon, climate-resilient economy that has a place for all of us. We must leave no one behind. The ILO is ready to step up efforts and invest in tangible action on the ground. With the generous support of the governments of Sweden and Germany, the ILO today announces the development of a guide that unpacks the linkages between gender, climate change, and employment, and gives guidance and practical examples of a gender transformative just transition. The guide is going through final consultations now, but a review copy is available at the QR code that you should see on the screen. Let us embark on this transformative journey, acknowledging the challenges and embracing the significant opportunities that lie ahead. Together, we can build a more equitable and sustainable world of work for the millions of workers, enterprises, and communities around the world. I thank you all for being here, and I would like to extend my personal gratitude to the government of Germany for allowing this space for today's dialogue. I look forward to listening to your invaluable insights, knowledge, and perspective, and I wish you all a successful and fruitful deliberation. Thank you.
Did everybody get the QR code? You all got it? Excellent. It did occur to me that as we're going to spend the day together, it'd be a really good idea, especially as we're exchanging ideas and putting recommendations together, breaking out together, that you should actually know each other. Very quick way of doing that. Look around the room, see someone you do not know, and say hello to them. If you're not talking, you are the most popular person in the room. This is looking good. I'm looking forward to the Q&A. Excellent, everybody. We will continue our getting to know each other during our lunch break. But this bodes well. I feel that our recommendations are going to be rich because we're now no longer strangers. No, I'm scared. Your conversation is much more interesting than mine. All right, eyes back up here. I do not know how this next speaker has time to do this, because can you imagine what being the Director of Communications and Engagement at UNFCCC must be like this week? Do you sleep? Do you eat? Do you just shake hands because that's all you can do for the next 3 or 4 days. I have no idea how she is doing this, but here today for us to talk about a gender transition and a just transition is Ina Parafanova. Thank you so much. We're really, really happy to see you and for you to fit us into your extremely busy day. Welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you, Femioke, for this most empathetic and accurate introduction I've had so far at COP. Distinguished delegates, colleagues, representatives of sister UN organizations, observers, experts, practitioners, good morning. Alongside my esteemed colleague, Ms. Celeste Drake, I'm pleased to welcome you to this workshop on delivering a gender-responsive just transition for all, organized by the International Labour Organization, ILO, and UN Climate Change. As we work to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and foster a sustainable future for all, just transition has the potential to drive ambitious climate action. It can build trust and facilitate transformative development. On that path, one thing has to be clear. Just transition and the promotion of gender equality are intrinsically linked. Just transition policies and programs need to take into account the strong gender dimension of environmental challenges and opportunities. They need to be gender responsive to promote equitable outcomes. This will not only minimize social, economic, and environmental risks and support greater inclusion, it will also strengthen climate mitigation and adaptation efforts through the empowerment of women as key agents of change. The imperatives of just transition of the workforce and the creation of decent work and quality jobs are recognized in the Paris Agreement. The agreement also acknowledges that parties should, when taking action to address climate change, respect, promote, and consider their respective obligations on human rights, including on gender equality and the empowerment of women. The connection between gender-responsive climate policy and just transition has long been recognized in our process. It continues to play a role under the Enhanced Lima Work Program on Gender and its Gender Action Plan and the work of the Katowice Committee of Experts and the impacts of the implementation of response measures. As our esteemed moderator Femioke said, this mandated event itself stems from decisions requesting the ILO to produce a technical paper and co-host this workshop. It is collaboration recognizing that the pursuit of climate solutions and social justice must go hand in hand. Today you will hear about examples of just transition policies that are gender responsive and explore the linkages and avenues to advance committees in this field. To align our goals of gender-responsive just transitions and climate action, we must focus on both the development of technical solutions and the necessary political commitments. This involves the production of quality gender data, knowledge exchange, fostering research development, and promoting technical cooperation. In this context, the call for action that emerged as the outcome of the Global Conference on Gender and Environment Data at COP28 invites all world leaders, policymakers, and other key actors in gender and environment data systems to urgently strengthen multi-stakeholder partnerships to support the production, uptake, finance, inclusive management, and governance of global gender and environment data. Without bold and coordinating action, including policies and strategic investments, we risk falling short of our climate and social justice objectives. It is critical that we unite in our commitment to this cause and act collectively to achieve meaningful impact and transformative change. I wish you a fruitful exchange and hope that this will result in an ambitious call to action for gender-responsive just transition pathways. Thank you.
When your aim is to rethink how the world works and make it better, allies, supporters, donors are so critical to make not just the ideas work, but the practical part of that transformation work. Which is why I'm so grateful to Mr. Dirk Meyer, Director of the Directorate General for Federal Ministry of the Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany, to join us here on the stage as we begin our big day of working out how do we deliver what we said that we would like to deliver. It's good to see you, Mr. Meyer. Please come on stage. It is such a long walk from there to here. Applause would be nice.
Well, actually, hopefully the applause is after the speech and not before. But many thanks for the introduction, Femi, and thank you to the International Labour Organization for organizing this timely and important event. So a very warm welcome from my side, distinguished delegates, colleagues, friends, and as you mentioned, Femi, supporters. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be part of today's discussion on delivering a gender-responsive just transition for all. For COP28, we are again coming together in times of multiple and intersecting crises, such as violent conflicts, food insecurity, and climate change. These crises exacerbate and deepen existing inequalities. Those who are already marginalized because of their gender, age, income, or ethnicity are disproportionately affected. So we have to bring two things together. First, to address the global crisis and overcome existing inequalities, we need resilient societies. This is more important than ever before. More equitable societies mean more resilient, stable, and peaceful societies. This is, in fact, a very old wisdom, forgotten for a too long time. And secondly, we will need to massively reduce emissions in order to keep the 1.5 degrees temperature limit within reach. A transition of our economies is key here. We are convinced that we can only address and mitigate the effects of climate change effectively if our transition policies and programs are inclusive and just. There won't be a transition if there is not a just transition. And the key for that is a feminist approach. Only with that we will succeed in transforming the structural inequalities that underlie our current system. If women cannot contribute equally their expertise on nature and land, then we lack key knowledge about sustainable solutions. This has long-term consequences for the resilience of entire communities. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, a gender-just climate policy and just transition are central elements of our German feminist development policy. Discriminatory laws, social norms, and gender roles not only render women and girls and marginalized groups, but also hinder their engagement in climate action. We need 100%, and we don't need just 50% for that. With our feminist development policy, we therefore aim to overcome structural causes of inequality, and I look very much forward to sharing later in the panel what path we have already taken to achieve this goal. Together with others, nobody can achieve real and transformative change alone, so therefore I believe that the setup of today's event, bringing the different stakeholder groups together, must also be part of that solution. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward, and thank you for your attention.
Yes? No? All right, very good. Takes a team. I love that we're about to have a fireside chat in a refrigerator of a room. We are warming this room up just via conversation alone. I'd like to invite to join me right up here, Michelle Parmalee. Michelle, thank you. And then also Ms. Cara Rees. Cara, please welcome. And part of this conversation will be in Spanish if you want to plug in your headsets. If you don't speak Spanish, you plug your headsets into the same place that you speak from. Very good. Thank you, ladies. Nice to see you. Come and sit up here on my left-hand side. Excellent. Hola. Please sit here, Kyra. Thank you. Michelle, would you tell everybody who you are and your impressive title and what you do? Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So, Michelle Parmalee. I serve as the president of the International Organization of Employers. And in my day job, I am a partner at Deloitte.
Good to have you. And hello, Kyra. Kyra, will you tell everybody who you are, what you do, your job? Thank you.
Hola, mi nombre. ¿Ahora?
Okay.
Hola, mi nombre es Kaira Riz, soy secretaria de Desarrollo Sustentable de la Confederación Sindical de Trabajadores y Trabajadoras de las Américas, CSA, en inglés las siglas TUCA. Somos parte de la Confederación Internacional, Confederación Sindical Internacional y TUC. Y nosotros nos dedicamos, ¿verdad?, como organizaciones sindicales representativas de las Américas, a ver toda la temática vinculada con el tema de ambiente y trabajo, con el tema de género, con los temas de migración laboral. Toda esa temática es la que nos corresponde ver en el desarrollo desde las Américas.
So you may have noticed if you're on Channel 3 that no Spanish came out of Channel 3. And that is because we do not have a Spanish interpreter. But Kyra, you do have a colleague with you, don't you?
Yes.
And she speaks English and Spanish.
No, I can.
You can do both?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. So can you do this fireside chat in English, or shall we ask your colleague to come up?
Yes.
Yes?
I will try to do it better in English.
All right, okay, very good. All right, thank you so much. Apologies, everybody, we're going back to just English. And let me just start with Michelle. When we are talking, Michelle, about challenges and opportunities for businesses, when we're looking at, even looking at a transition to a sustainable economy, first of all, what are your challenges? Or what are businesses' challenges?
Sure. So as I mentioned in the introduction, I serve as the president of the International Organization of Employers. And for those not familiar with the IOE is the largest private sector network representing 50 million businesses from around the world through 150 national employer organizations. And just transition, the transition of the economy to be more sustainable, if you will, is high on the business agenda, which means that it's high on the agenda of the IOE. Each of us is aware that there is work to be done to ensure a just transition for everyone, and in particular, we're focused on the gender dimension, right, of just transition. You know, this transition that the economy is going through, that sectors, industries are going through, has begun, But we expect that it will accelerate, and frankly, it needs to accelerate to reach the commitments and the goals that we all have. And that transformation offers a number of opportunities, but we need to work together to realize those opportunities and to help implement coherent and adequate measures and policies. We need to make sure that each stakeholder is considered and that vulnerable groups are accommodated. This opportunity includes training programs, educational opportunities to equip people with the skills required for their participation in the labor market and in the future greener labor market. And just transition planning, policies, when done right, can maximize opportunities for decent work and for social justice, and can minimize and mitigate negative impacts, ensuring fair and inclusive outcomes in a process based on social dialogue and stakeholder engagement. And this, in fact, this was recently reaffirmed in the ILO proposed resolution and conclusions of the General Discussion Committee on a Just Transition, adopted by the 111th session of the International Labor Conference, where the IOE leads the engagement of employers' groups. The ILO's tripartite structure, longstanding experience in labor policy and advancing decent work for women, as well as its expertise in labor markets, ensures its leading role in the Just Transition agenda. So, we have the opportunity, but to seize it, we need to work together through the Just Transition Work Program, through different UN agencies, governments, private sector, other stakeholders to ensure the transition to sustainability improves jobs overall, and that it improves women's access and participation in those jobs.
Kyra, so what we're really looking at are practical and effective solutions. And I always love that word solutions, because we always come with so many challenges that we sometimes get lost in where will be the practical solutions that actually work. From the employee's perspective, Kyra.
Thank you. Our Trade Union Confederation of Americas, as a regional representation of the international trade union workers, recognize the structural barriers in the economic model, our current model. It puts profit at the center with the exploitation of works and intensifies this exploitation in women's labor. This model is committed to the privatization of state functions, public services, and commodification of lives. Our solutions are based on the proposal of a sustainable development model that puts labor and human life at the center of the decisions. We need that just transition overcome the inequalities generated by the sexual division of labor. It should also ensure the strengthening and expansion of decent work, just like they mentioned right now, with full respect for fundamental labor rights, but including addressing gender discrimination. Our trade unions promote and defend that labor should remain the center of the dignity of the life in all of our societies. In this line for trade unions in the Americas, a transition from high-carbon economy based on agro-industrial, mining, energy extraction to a social and environmentally sustainable industry should ensure strengthening and expansion of decent work, like I just mentioned, with full respect for labor rights, social protection, for all human rights, but with a special face-up action on women's needs to close inequality gaps.
Michelle, I'm just thinking about leveraging the position of women in a green economy. What are businesses doing? What examples could you kind of give to us?
Sure, so let me start with some data to set the context. At the current pace, of national efforts for women's economic empowerment, it will likely take another generation and a half to realize gender equity objectives. The World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2022 estimates that it will take 132 years at our current pace to close the gender gap. So hashtag act on the gap, right down there. Based on the IOE and Deloitte 2022 G20 monitoring report on women empowerment, women were more likely to lose their jobs than men during the COVID-19 pandemic. The ILO estimates that in 2020, 1.25 women lost their jobs for every man, while a study by the World Bank found that the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed an additional 47 million women and girls into extreme poverty. So collective action at the global scale is required to help reverse this trend. Other areas to address: the continued exclusion of women is exacerbated by existing imbalances in access to skills, imbalances in access to technology and assets, unequal distribution of care and responsibilities, unequal distribution of care policy and service packages. And this follows a protracted lack of investment in feminized sector with high potential for decent job creation in the green economy, such as care and the agriculture sectors. Clear commitments highlighting the gender dimension of just transition plans, policies, and programs should be introduced in a more systematic way in nationally determined contributions, NDCs, for skills and education. I want to add that women are often more involved in work in informal sectors, in agriculture activities as well as domestic activities. And these could experience significant changes with more sustainable practices. The energy sector, which is on the front line of just transition, is often male-dominated, and its transformation offers opportunity to make it more accessible for women. In 2022, through IOE's leadership and engagement at the B20, IOE took on the B20 One Global Woman Empowerment, the so-called AGWI initiative. AGWI is an all-inclusive platform that can contribute to the collective global effort to empower women. How can it do this? It is a global resource, is a digital resource. It is a networking platform for advancing inclusive, resilient, and sustainable global economic growth by empowering women in business. Now, gender empowerment needs to be a priority at the top in all organizations. It's not just about a female movement. And I thank our panelists and our participants here who are men, right? All of us need to come together in this conversation. It's not just a female movement. And it's not just about setting up women's networks. It means a firm conviction that bringing women to the top of managerial positions can bear results and have a positive impact. According to research from the International Finance Corporation, having more women in business leadership positions leads to higher environmental, social, and governance standards. This research also highlights that more women in senior leadership can influence a firm's decision to address demands from major stakeholders by reporting more extensively on greenhouse gas emissions levels. Just a couple comments on SMEs, small and medium enterprises. A recent figure from the World Bank shows that 70% of formal SMEs owned by women in developing countries are denied access to finance by financial institutions, and they cannot receive adequate financial services. This is due to the lack of networks, knowledge, links to high-value markets, and this further constrains female entrepreneurship. The OECD acknowledges this for developed economies as well. If we go to the informal sector, this problem becomes even more serious. Access to finance is a critical challenge for any SME, but even more for those in the informal sector, and an almost impossible mission for those women in the informal sector in developing economies. We need to promote, support, accompany, and stimulate women entrepreneurship. Stimulating women entrepreneurship stimulates our global economy. Final point, ensuring access to education for girls is a pivotal pathway to success in climate leadership. Access to skills and education for girls can increase their resilience, can help build their capacity and their relationships to set up business critically. In developed and developing countries, girls' participation in STEM education on an equal platform with boys can enable them to access traditionally male-dominated positions, and these are critical for climate change anticipation. So IOE takes this agenda of just transition, of the intersection with gender, very seriously, very ambitiously. As president of IOE, I've made it one of my priorities, and we stand ready to continue working with our partners, with the ILO and with others, as well as through our global network of employer organizations on this topic.
So Kyra just took her pen and did this on her notes. And I am curious, Kyra, what did you highlight and why?
Thank you very much. I think that it's important to mention that this climate crisis cannot be solved by false solutions. And that use, many of the time, the crisis like an excuse to deepen the model, the economic model, affecting labor and human rights, ignoring sometimes deepened relations and dependence of exploitation of working people, especially of women's workers. And women's workers and people that are in situation of vulnerability. For us, it's important to highlight in our just transition concept and what we think about the dimensions that we have to mention of this. The transition must move us to a model that puts labor and dignity life at the center of the development of this model, doing emphasis, obviously, on productive and reproductive work, recognizing the overburden of women that have been assigned to regarding reproductive work, protect collective bargain, and the other effective mechanism of dialogue, social participation, preserving the self-determination of people and nations within the framework of democratic processes. For us, it's important the democratic consultation processes with policies, assessment, and including women's participation, who are the most affected most of the time. Talking about new sources of employment and may arise in transition, and talking about entrepreneurs and all of this, we think about that decent work is a guiding principle. For us, it's have to have good conditions work, wages, just wages, and benefits under the principle that workers should not pay the cost of any transition. Guarantee actions for work and labor without violence and harassment, promoting the elimination of gender violence. Union representation should be preserved and expanded, especially with membership by branches of the activity in transition. For us, it is important that we have the income and livelihood guarantee for communities in affected territories, saving the principle of free, prior, and informed consent, freedom of the decision of those countries. The role of the state has guarantee of rights through comprehensive public policies with universal social protection. For us, this is a fundamental topic that define that care is an integral part of the rights of social protection, protecting food and energy sovereignty while preserving common goods. For us, it's important to mention that just transition must protect collective bargains and other effective mechanisms of dialogue, to make a synthesis of this, preserving self-determination of people and nations, within framework of participation with real democratic processes and policy assessment, including women's in this discussion or in this dialogue. Women's participation in collective bargain must be integral, beyond the traditional considered that gender issues incorporating the vision on structural issues of the employment relationships and between reducing the mechanism that depend that the sexual division of labor. It is imperative that transition or just transition guarantee unrestricted respect for fundamental labor rights, protection of collective bargains, and the other effective mechanism of dialogue. We have 3 mentions about justice that we have to consider in this. One is the justice of climate. The other one is the social justice. And another one is gender justice. This is one each other is a complement of what we think that it's the principal or the main key of this, this condition.
Michelle, Kyra, I really want to thank you. Our conversation this morning has started off beautifully with the both of you right here. I'm just going to ask you something which you didn't prepare for. Kyra, tell me what was the most compelling thing that Michelle said?
I think she mentioned the importance about how, from her point of view, gender is a main topic in their consideration that what they are doing. But I think that it's important what she mentioned about some statistics between the women that are in new positions and all of the importance that we need, and I think I agree with her with this point of view, that we need a special space to have this conversation between employers, governments, and workers. And this special conversation or dialogue needs to put in front of us justice of climate, but she mentioned about the importance that we have to take care of the gender justice.
Michelle, what stuck out for you from what Kyra said that you will take away with you? Just briefly.
Sure. Well, I think we're aligned in terms of how we all need to come together on these topics, right? Not just taking the labor view, the government view, the employer's view, right? It's going to take all of us to solve these really intractable challenges. But, you know, I think your description and your ambition around decent work and the involvement of women in conversations on matters that affect them, women aren't always at the table. So emphasizing the importance of having women at the table is important, emphasizing kind of all the elements that make up what's considered decent work. I mean, business and human rights is also an incredibly important topic to the IOE, and I think it's becoming increasingly important to employers to have a more specific vision of what human rights means to them, how they define it, how they measure it, how they react to it, and I think your comments are relevant to that conversation.
Thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. I'm going to send you back onto the floor, but I know we'll be talking to you again later on. Thank you. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists, you know who you are, to come on stage. So, if I may remind you, Dirk Meyer, Angelica Ponce, Maria Selen, and Gina Cortez. Kyra, I'm just going to let you know that Spanish interpretation is now working, now that you've left the stage. But we love the fact, no, don't come back. But we love the fact that you actually were bilingual. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And if somebody would sit next to me, I would appreciate it, so people don't think I'm deeply unpopular. Gina, Angelica, Dirk, Maria, thank you. So we're going to start at the end with Maria. If you press your microphone button, Maria, please will you introduce yourself to our attendees? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Femi. My name is Maria Selin. I represent SIDA, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. I'm based in Amman at the Swedish Embassy there, responsible for a regional program in MENA. Thank you.
I'm doing housekeeping and introducing the panel. Dirk, please go ahead. Introduce yourself. Reintroduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Dirk Meyer. I'm Director General in the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development in Germany. And therefore, I'm representing the feminist approach in development policy, which Minister Schulze launched from the beginning of her taking over.
Angelica, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Bueno, muy buenos días. Mi nombre es Angélica Ponce, soy del Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia, una mujer indígena, líder también de la Confederación Sindical de Mujeres Interculturales, ahora con el cargo de la Autoridad Plurinacional de la Madre Tierra en Bolivia.
Thank you so much. And Gina, welcome.
Muy buenos días para todos. My name is Gina Cortez Valderrama. I am from Colombia, and I am one of the co-focal points of the Women and Gender Constituency, one of the official observers for the UNFCCC process. Thank you.
So what I'm thinking right now is, if we are delivering a gender-responsive, just transition for all, what made you decide out of all of COP28 that you were going to be here in this hour on this panel? Maria.
Thank you. It's a good question because there are so many panels and so much going on, isn't there? But just very briefly, gender equality, the rights of women, advancing the rights of women, and really talking about a just transition is at the heart of what we do at SIDA. Thank you.
Gina, why did you have to be here today?
At this COP, we are starting to speak and put more attention into just transition. We're going to be speaking about the establishment of the Just Transition Work Program. That entails a more deeper reflection from a truly feminist perspective that understands that without addressing the systems of oppression, we cannot really talk about that transformation.
Dirk, you kind of had to be here, but why are you enjoying being here?
I do enjoy, first of all, because I have a very close relationship with the ILO, and I have a very close relationship towards the structural aspect on what does it mean to organize just transition. And that is not just a question of projects, but it is fundamentally to have gender equality in the design of the transition. And like to share that. Therefore, I'm liking to be here.
We're looking forward to the sharing. Angelica, for you, why was it important that you were on this session, in this session today? There are so many sessions you could be in, but why this one?
Bueno, primero creo que es muy importante hacer respetar nuestros derechos de las mujeres, porque como mujer boliviana pienso, siento que todas las mujeres de las clases sociales diferentes en el mundo necesitamos una transición justa para las mujeres quienes somos más vulnerables al impacto del cambio climático. Como mujeres estamos a cargo de la familia, pero también como mujeres rurales estamos a cargo de la preservación de las semillas dentro de nuestras comunidades. Por eso es que hoy aquí quiero hacer conocer nuestro sentimiento como mujeres indígenas, como mujeres autoridades también del tema cambio climático del Estado plurinacional, que la transición justa para el género es también muy importante. Las nuevas tecnologías pueden y deben tener acceso para las mujeres rurales, porque es importante que llegue a quienes son más vulnerables, que somos nosotras las mujeres indígenas, las mujeres rurales, las mujeres que día a día estamos buscando nuevas políticas de luchar para la justicia de género, pero en principio para la justicia climática, la justicia social. Esas tres posiciones fundamentales de las mujeres deben ser tomadas en cuenta en estos espacios globales y también dentro de nuestros países, porque es muy importante que el mundo y el patriarcado conozca nuestra posición de mujer, nuestra posición de madre, porque nosotras como mujeres nos asemejamos con nuestra madre tierra. Por eso es que luchamos para la justicia climática, porque somos nosotras quienes vamos a ver el futuro de nuestros hijos. Somos nosotras, las mujeres, la fuente de vida para la humanidad. Es por eso que nosotras, las mujeres, tenemos que seguir luchando para la justicia social, para la justicia climática, que es muy importante y está en la primera plana en esta discusión, pero más allá también la justicia climática, la justicia de género es primordial en los espacios globales, gubernamentales y municipales también.
Angelica.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Angelica. I wanted to ask Gina, just very briefly, Gina, why are you here? I'm going to move on to ask about policies and delivering a gender-responsive, just transition for all. Certainly, Maria, in your work, it's something that you do all of the time. You're looking at in Sweden, how do you do that? How do you create those opportunities for women? Can you give us some of those examples, please?
Thank you very much. And it's almost difficult to add something because I think we're all speaking the same message here. For us, obviously, we see that there are a lot of examples where we can work with women, for women, but we need to really include women in the dialogue when we design the programs. And I think, you know, it's not so difficult, really. we need just to be open for that conversation. And we need to be there. I think as development partners, we tend to sometimes a little bit too often stick in our offices in our capitals, but we need to be out there, we need to be talking. And we can do surveys, we can do interviews, we can do a lot of things also with digital technologies. So I think first and foremost, it needs to be inclusive, and we need to bring in women into the design of the program, as well as the actual implementation, the follow-up and the monitoring and all of that we do. And I think we have many, many examples of where that's been successful, because in all honesty, if there isn't an inclusive process in designing the programs for the women and for the vulnerable groups and the marginalized groups, it's just not going to work. So that's what we try to do. That approach is important, I think.
Dirk, in Germany, recently adopted a foreign feminist policy, a feminist development policy. What does that mean in a forum like today? What would you like to share?
Yeah, thank you. I would say it's two aspects. The first aspect is what you already said when it comes to the programming of what we do. We have an annual budget of around about 12 billion per year on development policy, and the minister decided that we continuously have about 93% by now being done and designed by a feminist approach. And that doesn't mean just the projects we have on the bilateral portfolio, but also when it comes to infrastructure, for instance. Because, I mean, when we talk about transformation and transition, we all know that when you have the feminist approach, a future city, a future transformed city will look differently than a male-dominated city. It will be completely different, the ways, the structures, and so on and so on. And that does mean that when we spend money, when we go into projects, when we talk with the partners and design it, from the beginning on, from the scratch on, we try to think differently. And the second thing, of course, is to have a structural view on what is going on. That means that when we are clear about times of multiple crises, we have to do everything to preserve societies after the elections of COVID, for instance, the conflicts we have, the food insecurity, to have social security as a basis so that societies, and especially vulnerable groups, affected groups, are not cracking down after these crises. And therefore, any kind of adaptive social protective systems are absolutely crucial, as well as what we have heard, the access to decent works, the access to skills, the access to schools, and so on. And have then all that from a feminist approach on mind from the beginning on. That's what's maybe in a nutshell what we're trying to do with what we call feminist development policy.
Gina, you are making notes. Share your notes, please.
Yes, I'm taking some notes to reflect as well on the understanding of feminist development policy, an understanding that I think that we need to break down on what we are still normalizing as development, a notion of development and progress that is still embedded in economic growth, and that is a delirium. To keep on fueling a notion of accumulation of growth by living beside perhaps the well-being, and with that, I think I would also reflect on what feminist movements are calling for. When we bring a feminist approach into the discussion, talking about just transitions, it is important for us to always ask about the who, and the why, the why. And by giving us those questions, we are going to dive deeper into those systems of oppression that are still perpetuating discrimination, inequality, and violence, particularly for racialized communities and women in all their diversity, who are actually subsidizing the capitalist system that keeps on fueling that notion of development. So my notes were kind of taking on how then a feminist development policy does address that to transform, because when we are talking about transforming, we are talking about really shifting those paradigms that are deeply, deeply, deeply interconnected with the institutions that keep on dominating how resources, how money flows go, how education systems are built up, who has access, control, and use to resources, to information, to capacity strengthening, and how in that way actually it is possible to deliver on those climate solutions, on those transitions that communities in the grassroots level.
Jean, if I may, I don't want these to be hypothetical questions because Dirk is right here and he's nodding. Ask him the questions.
Yeah,
Yeah, all right. And Dirk made notes, so he's going to answer the questions. All right, let's do it. Go ahead.
Well, the point is that I agree to a lot of what my colleague said, because we are truly convinced that when we talk about transition, green transition, we talk about a reinvention of a lot of our systems. And we earlier on heard from the colleague from the trade unions that there is a lot of distrust around the world at the moment. It's not just the distrust on a national base or between employers and employees, but it's also a distrust between the developed world and the developing world. And it's all about a lot of white elephants in the room. And some of these white elephants is probably the question of representation in the financial institutions and what kind of economic growth model is behind that. So we are not talking about changing some little steps. We are talking about changing systems we are used to for at least 250 years with all the effects on gender and so on. So it is very tough, and we just heard about the 130 years going ahead for equality. Time is not on our side. That's also. So it's a lot of alignment between us, unfortunately or fortunately, what I heard. But all these institutions, all of them, we need the pressure. We need pressure from the outside to move and to move more quickly. Even saying that, being part of the system in a way.
I really just want to add one thing, and I think it's about leadership, and it is, you know, we need to move beyond the sort of the story about how women are affected by climate change or economic decline, and see that women are really in a position to be driving change, and for that you know, it takes leadership, like you were alluding to. And I couldn't help but noticing, of course, the last COP and this COP, when you look at the photos of all the heads of states being flown in and out, there is a gender imbalance. And that cuts across every level, I think, wherever you go. So, you know, we need to start at the leadership issues and bring women to the decision-making tables, and the young women to the decision-making tables as well. Thank you.
Angelica, I see you nodding. Go ahead, articulate that nod.
Bueno, primero me confunde entre el español y el inglés. Me parece que es muy importante esta conversación tan profunda en el tema de género. Muchas veces no es fácil, ¿no? Hacer entender al mundo de que nuestra lucha de las mujeres, hablando incluso del Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia, Cuando muchos años atrás nosotras las mujeres en Bolivia no teníamos derecho a organizarnos, no teníamos derecho a ser parte de la política, no teníamos derechos a muchos aspectos. Pero hoy en día, gracias a nuestras luchas, estamos donde estamos y creo que cada una de nosotras tenemos que tomar ejemplo desde la trayectoria que venimos haciendo como mujeres, no solamente en Bolivia, sino en el mundo entero. Y la esperanza está en cada una de nosotras de poder reclamar nuestros derechos, ¿no? En los diferentes espacios, en los diferentes escenarios, dentro de nuestros países y por supuesto a nivel global, ¿no? Que esa transferencia de tecnologías también tiene que llegar a las mujeres y que no pueden obviar un derecho fundamental. Como mujeres somos las que más, muchas veces nosotras, más que todo hablando de mi persona, o mujeres que también son del área rural, mujeres que viven en la Amazonía, mujeres que vivimos en el altiplano, en los valles, somos mujeres que muchas veces llevamos la cruda realidad del impacto climático o la desigualdad social o el impacto del golpe del patriarcado. Y muchas veces eso no entiende el mundo capitalista, el mundo patriarcal. Y creo que hoy es importante decirnos, cada una de nosotras, de que si todos, todas en conjunto a nivel mundial ponemos nuestra posición fundamental, porque son nuestros derechos de poder acceder también a estas transferencias de tecnologías, por supuesto no nos pueden coartar porque son nuestros derechos, porque nosotros vemos la vida de nuestros hijos, porque nosotros vamos a seguir cuidando la humanidad. No puedo olvidarme decir nuevamente que nosotras las mujeres somos semejantes a la Madre Tierra, pero muchas veces no se dan cuenta, porque al final somos mujeres que nos damos la vida y la Madre Tierra nos da vida a nosotras. Y creo que es muy importante considerarlo. Nosotros en Bolivia lo respetamos mucho, los derechos de la Madre Tierra. Tenemos una ley fundamental que hoy está en las manos de un pueblo, de una mujer indígena como mi persona, y es por eso que hago un llamado fundamental y reflexiono al patriarcado mundial y al capitalismo, que también las mujeres necesitamos las transferencias de tecnología. Tenemos que ser parte de las decisiones fundamentales a nivel global y por supuesto dentro de nuestros gobiernos nacionales también. Es importante poder sentir el apoyo que nosotras nos merecemos como mujeres. No solamente es discusión, no solamente son leyes, no solamente son posiciones, no solamente queden en discursos, ¿no? En estos escenarios o en otras, de que se hable del género, pero al final no llegue el impacto o no llegue a ejecutarse, ¿no? Las decisiones que se van desarrollando en cada evento, sea global, sea nacional o sea departamental o municipal. El aspecto de la mujer hasta hoy espera esa decisión fundamental. Necesita la hermana del hogar la ayuda correspondiente para poder mejorar la vida de ella y de sus hijas, de sus hijos, que es lo más fundamental. Porque la mujer somos el pilar fundamental de la familia a nivel mundial.
In about 10 minutes, everybody who's applauding is about to be part of the discussion in a much more integral way, because I'm going to open up our technical workshop to questions that you may well have for the speakers who've been speaking so far. This just gives you a sense of where they're coming from, where their interests are, where their expertise happens to be, but we are definitely not talking at you. We're in this technical workshop all together. So start thinking about how you want to talk to anybody you have spoken or heard spoken so far in our workshop today. I'm thinking about how do we achieve delivering. I love the way that this workshop has been titled Delivering. It's like we have to leave with something. We have to hand something over Maria.
Yes, I think I keep coming back to the words of participation, inclusivity, because it is about, and I mean, we have those words in all our important documents. It's a human rights-based approach. It's in all our documents, but we really need to live up to that. I don't think we can deliver unless people's voices are heard, unless we bring everyone on board. I think that is just key, and I think we need to do it in practice. We need to take it away from the fancy documents and the important guidelines that we have, and really get together and do from the start of the design. So I think, you know, I keep coming back to that. I think it's about an inclusivity, it's about participation, and a respect for the different views, and bringing it to the context where we are, because one size also doesn't fit all. We need to be aware and sensitive to where we want to work and where we, as development partners, want to fund programs. We need to understand the specificities of the context. So yes, I think that's how we deliver. Thank you.
Do you have any examples, or even one that you can share with us, about the participatory process? What does that look like? What does that look like for you and your organisation?
I think I can bring one example on top of my mind. It wasn't that long ago. I was in a rural area in Africa, in Zimbabwe, and it was about sitting around the table with the community, listening in to what were the needs in that particular community, listening in to see, okay, well, how can we work together? And as a development partner, we can't just come in and say, okay, let's fund this. No, we have to work with the communities, with the leaders, with the government, with the local governments. And this is, as I said again, it's not rocket science. It's actually just being there, listening in and understanding. So this is a participatory approach that we really want to work with our partners wherever we go. And I think in the world of work, as well as also when we talk about the informal sector, which has been mentioned here, it's just super important. Thank you.
Dirk, we have to talk about financing, because we have thoughts about how we want our world to change, and change faster than 132 years. So where will the resources come from? Where are those investments that you see are possible, that perhaps Germany is leading on? What do you think?
Well, when you put this in the context of a just transition, I think we all realize by now that it will be not just a case of public financing, because it comes to an end at the moment. That's realistic, I think, when we talk about that. So we need much more instruments that involve the private sector. And we heard from our colleague that private sector seems to be ready. Probably not 100%, but I would say the progressive parts of private sector are ready too. Then it becomes very technical, of course, it does, and very practical, how to organize that. So when we look at the financial systems, not just of the multilateral systems, but also of the national ones. Yesterday I attended a side event where Rwanda started its taxonomy, which includes a gender approach as well as the ecological approach. And they are trying to manage a national system that invites and involves private sector. So then it comes to that. And it's this combination we need on the national levels, together with the multilateral levels, and having the role of a government representative. It's our role to promote this. And Germany tries to do that very much, because we have quite a bit of experience in that, although we are also not at the end of success, of course.
Gina, go ahead.
Let me disagree with what has been said.
Yes.
So that we can engage in the conversation, because I'm struggling to understand a feminist approach that promotes privatization a privatization that has fueled the commodification of our bodies, the commodification of our territories, and that put at risk basic human rights. And this is something that we are having the discussion in other conversations, not only in the Just Transition, but for example, in the Loss and Damage Fund, with all the discussions about who is going to be hosting the fund, the World Bank, and so on. Those same institutions that have been perpetuating inequality through structural adjustments and so on in the different countries. So disagree, but let me then propose. Because there has been some figures that I think are important to mention when we are talking about care economies and what aligns care economies. And there are two things that are not part of the vocabulary of feminism or care economy. And these two things are extractivism and militarism. The production gap report from 2023 has illustrated that extractive legacy in the sense of how governments' global plans and projection pathways are going to lead to 460% more coal production, 83% more gas, and 29% more oil than if taking those respected pathways under the 1.5, and for that, subsidies are still being given. And on the other hand, these trajectories intersect with very worrying numbers in which subsidies are still being given to the destruction of territories along the globe, when the 7 top emitters are also among the 10 global military spenders. And a study that came last year from the Transnational Institute has said how between 2013 and 2021, $9.4 trillion, $9.4 trillion what is spent in military. And we're still thinking about why the 100 billion has not been achieved when military spending was 9.4. So allow me to let us have that reflection when we are talking about care economies, when we are talking about feminism, because those things are not aligned. And when we are thinking about money and how to finance and deliver a gender-just transition that responds to human rights and community well-being for a life in dignity, the money is there, and we know where we need to divest that sector. We know where the richest power is. For example, there are also a report from Oxfam that was launched this year as well, said how by putting a tax on the richest earners from 60% would as well bring us many trillions. To stop investing on the luxury of a few and investing in those social protections of the majority of the world. Because if we don't fund those social protection infrastructure, how are women in the informal sector being able to leave their children at home, to go to a work, to build up their futures? So the money is there. The money is there. We need to divest to a life in dignity and well-being.
So I'm now going to open up the floor for Q&A. Before I do that, I just want to say thank you to Maria Selin. You saw her trying to sneak out like a ninja in the front of the entire room, so she didn't manage to do that, but she has to go to another commitment. But I thank her for being part of this panel. Kyra, would you come and join us on the panel here? Great, because then people will be able to see you when they want to ask questions as well. Michelle from Deloitte has already left us, but we can definitely get Kyra back from the fireside chat. Show of hands as to where the questions are in the room so far. Okay, great. I'm going to go right to the back with the blue and the red and the print. Okay, hello.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Portia Dumensa and I'm from Ghana. I'm a grassroots activist, and always when these conversations are being made, I ask myself, how do we translate it into the local dialect for our women? It's a great conversation we are having here, and how well can we be able to have equal access, leaving no one behind, and making sure that our mothers that are at the front line, they are the vulnerable ones, and they need to be part of this conversation. I call it giving them a seat at the table. So I'm speaking for community leaders, community influencers, our mothers who are leaders in our homes. How do we translate this conversation to them? Thank you.
Angelica, will you take that question?
Por supuesto, yo creo que más allá de los discursos, más allá de que estén discutiendo de que haya o no haya presupuesto para el tema de género, para las mujeres locales, para las mujeres en sí, las que están en casa, que muchas veces son padre y madre para sus hijos, creo que es una decisión fundamental, ¿no?, de los países más desarrollados. Creo que es muy importante que consideren que mientras nosotros vayamos hablando en diferentes espacios, sean en los espacios que se requieran, globales o locales, el cambio climático no solamente está esperando que haya una justicia social con el género. El cambio climático, la crisis climática ya nos está golpeando a las mujeres. La injusticia, la desigualdad social no está esperando que tomen en cuenta, ¿no?, los gobiernos desarrollados o el mundo patriarcal, que considere que hay un espacio tan especial que es la mujer, que es la madre, que es la hermana, ¿no?, que tiene que ser tomada en cuenta y está en la lucha, pero no está esperando eso. Seguimos muriendo, por ejemplo, si hablamos con el tema de los feminicidios, si hablamos de los feminicidios en diferentes países, en mi país también, el patriarcado sigue castigando, pero no está esperando de que se trate todavía si va a haber financiamiento o no va a haber financiamiento, si damos el derecho correspondiente o no. La discusión está y creo que es muy suficiente hasta ahora. Creo que aquí tiene que haber una decisión fundamental, más allá de los discursos, tiene que haber una decisión fundamental para que nuestras hijas y nuestros hijos sean reconocidas de manera igual. La desigualdad social con el género hasta hoy sigue siendo una lucha, ¿no? Desde nuestras abuelas, desde nuestras madres, nuestras tías, lucharon por generaciones y nosotros seguimos luchando. ¿Cuándo vamos a dar la igualdad a nuestros hijos? Creo que lo mejor que podamos dejar hoy en la humanidad es la igualdad social a las hermanas, a las mujeres y por supuesto a nuestros hijos, a nuestros hermanos, a nuestros maridos, ¿no? La igualdad social. Con eso llegamos a las comunidades, llegamos a poder complacer las necesidades de manera igual para todos. Mientras seguirán en discusiones.
All right, so the question was, how do you translate this high-level, ambitious conversation to people who are in a village in Ghana? Kyra, in a sentence, how do you translate? How do you translate everything that we're doing here at COP28 to a village in Ghana? In a sentence, though.
Creo que es importante mencionar, y este es un espacio importante para nosotros poder correlacionar la necesidad de conjugar los distintos espacios donde estamos las mujeres, donde estamos los distintos actores de la sociedad. Si bien es cierto, nosotros representamos un movimiento sindical de trabajadores y trabajadoras, es fundamental los procesos de alianzas con las comunidades, de alianzas con los movimientos sociales, con los movimientos feministas, con los movimientos ambientalistas, para sentarnos a ver prioridades, para sentarnos a hablar del tema de la financiación, del tema del proceso de la transición laboral, del tema del proceso incluso de la recuperación de los territorios, de las comunidades que han sido afectadas en estos procesos. Pero todo ese círculo o esa integración de conversaciones tiene que tener un específico énfasis en el impacto diferenciado en mujeres, en las interseccionalidades, cuando son mujeres de nuestros pueblos originarios, las mujeres afrodescendientes, cuando son nuestros niños y niñas que vienen de los pueblos pobres, cuando viene la pobreza inmerso en la etnicidad de las personas que están. Las condiciones no son las mismas y por eso nosotros enfocamos en centrarnos en una discusión del modelo de desarrollo. No puede haber simplemente una transición justa si vamos a transitar de una técnica a otra o de una energía a otra o de una situación a otra bajo la misma estructura del modelo de desigualdades. Tenemos que hablar del modelo de desarrollo que implique centrar en la vida de las personas, pero la relación que tiene esa vida con el trabajo y definitivamente con el medio ambiente. Por eso centramos nuestra posición en justicia de género, justicia social y justicia ambiental, lo cual entre las tres son un pilar fundamental de la discusión que tenemos que tener.
Thank you, Kyra, for that magical sentence. We move on. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question or call to action for the federal minister, because of in his communication he mentioned that on the annual budget 93% of their project have feminist approach. And as you know, Senegal has signed a JETP with German. How do you think German government will influence the Senegal government to take into account this approach, because of not our case in the country?
I don't need my own translation. Thank you very much for that question. Well, first of all, I think the JETPs are a very interesting instrument, because it's a very comprehensive and joint action. And when it comes, for instance, to access to energy, we talked about that before, that access to energy is a gender topic, for instance, because we see that the movement from a very centralized, very male-dominated energy production industries, we go to much more decentralized industries and manufacturers when it comes to solar and when it comes to wind. And therefore, it will be much more easy, especially when it comes to solar, access to solar energy, access for everybody. That makes it much more easier, because it's also much more independent from the grids. So therefore, this will be one of the aspects that will help thinking the energy transformation also with this feminist approach. So that will be part then of the further communications between the group from the JETP on our side and the government of Senegal. And to add this with the other question, bringing that on the ground, means, of course, that we try to integrate in all our projects we do and all the programming, to have stock taking, of course, with the people on the ground. And the institutions which do it for the German government, like the GIZ, very often come from people, locals who are part of the GIZ and being part and integrate all these topics also in the programming, which they contact back to us in Berlin and help us to program it on the ground and not on top of that.
Remind me where all the questions are in the room. Okay, okay. Panel, take note for your length of your answers when we see how many questions we need to get to. Yes, thank you. You were holding up a name of a country, I believe. So that's how I'm going to say it's you next. Please go ahead. What's your question?
Merci beaucoup. Je me nomme Aïssata Cissé, je viens du Mali, sur le point focal national genre et climat. Je travaille au ministère de l'Environnement. Donc je remercie vraiment l'initiative. J'ai des préoccupations au ministre fédéral de l'Allemagne parce que j'ai entendu parler d'un constat, beaucoup plus de femmes, beaucoup plus d'hommes présidents, comme beaucoup plus d'hommes présents à la COP que de femmes. Selon lui, il nous faudra, je ne suis pas pessimiste, mais il nous faut combien de temps, ou bien il y a des outils déjà qui sont mis en place pour qu'on arrive à changer cet écart-là. Parce que je sais qu'au Mali, nous, on a pris une loi sur le genre où on exige 30%, mais je sais qu'on fait une année où on peut atteindre 30%, la deuxième année ou bien troisième mandat, on atteint 10%, etc. Je ne sais pas s'il y a un outil efficace. Je ne suis pas pessimiste, mais je suis en train de voir quand est-ce que je vais voir beaucoup, 70% de femmes présidentes, 70% de femmes ministres que d'hommes. Et aussi la question qu'il avait posée sur la diminution des fonds publics par rapport aux fonds privés. Je ne vois pas trop comment ça peut passer. Pour moi, c'est l'État qui garantit un peu l'inclusivité et même la justice aussi entre eux. Mais si ce fonds public diminue au profit du fonds privé, je ne vois pas. Je veux mieux comprendre en un mot. Merci beaucoup.
I feel that's almost a question for the entire... Yes?
We collect?
Yeah, yeah.
Do we collect questions?
No, I'm actually going to just do them one by one, otherwise we will run out of time for all the questions. But I'm just going to do it very, very briefly about filling the gap. Gina, do you want to start with that one?
Can you please reframe the question because it was not clear for me?
Yeah. Let me just do it very, very briefly because I feel like everybody here on the panel has an idea of where that. How do we fill a gap between the equity between men and women, where that equity is about 132 years apart, right? So again, I'm just going to get some thoughts from you, from the panel, and then Dirk, do you want to pick up that question that was particularly for you as well? All right.
Okay, in terms of equality, this is something that we have as well as started discussing on the access, the use, the control of resources, and how then the different legal frameworks, the different institutions are then allowing for frameworks where women's participation in all the diversity are integrated, and a way to start closing as well the gap is what as well my sister was saying about that intersectional approach that understands and recognizes the different realities, the different layers of discrimination, and how we integrate that into the conversation. Because the thing is that for really closing that gap of equality, we need to understand that we are living in a system of different layers of discrimination and oppression that are based on a conception of racialization, of a conception of sexism, of a conception of class. And without understanding all those different structural layers, we are not going to achieve any type of inequality, because there we are always leaving somebody behind. So a way of that is, for example, by data. The importance of data in all the different conversations that we are having here at COP or outside is so relevant to understand how the impacts of climate change affect women, girls, LGBTIQ population in a different way. as well to understand who is receiving the money, as well to understand who is having a guarantee to exercise their rights as others. And we need to start collecting the data, and we need to start understanding that we live in a world where there are some privileged, and we live in a world where there are some marginalized. And this is a way that we start having very uncomfortable conversations. Uncomfortable conversations and dialogue on colonialism and racism. To start understanding how these institutions are perpetuating that racism and that colonialism. Because otherwise we are not going to achieve that equality. If we keep on fueling the same system, the same institution that keeps benefiting just as some. And it goes beyond women and men. It goes beyond that conception. It goes for farmers, it goes for trade unions, it goes for all the different groups that represent civil society. Thank you.
Angelica, do you have anything to add briefly, please?
Yes, very briefly.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Excuse me. And then I'll come to you, Dirk.
Okay. Bueno, creo que es muy importante, más allá de las discusiones, es cambiar el sistema. Y para cambiar el sistema es importante de que cada una de las hermanas, cada una de las mujeres, hagamos también el trabajo correspondiente de la unidad. Alguien en este panel decía que las alianzas hacen fuerza. Dentro de nuestros gobiernos locales, dentro de nuestras comunidades, tenemos que hacer alianzas como mujeres para ser incluidas en las decisiones importantes, en las decisiones gubernamentales, en las decisiones globales. Ahí decía también una hermana, el 70% de la participación en la COP de hombres y el 30% de participación de las mujeres en la COP es algo muy lamentable, fundamentalmente para todas las mujeres que por supuesto tenemos el derecho de poder estar acá, pero lamentablemente no toman en cuenta. No toman en cuenta nuestra participación, no tenemos recursos, no tenemos financiamientos, no tenemos acceso a las ventanas de financiamiento como género. Por ejemplo, en mi país, la Autoridad Plurinacional de la Madre Tierra, donde yo ahora estoy como autoridad, he creado una plataforma específicamente de mujeres. Como mujer sindicalista, como mujer indígena, tengo que tomar las previsiones correspondientes para que mis hermanas del Estado Plurinacional de Bolivia tengan acceso a la decisión fundamental desde la autoridad en el gobierno. Y eso es una muestra no solamente para nosotras internamente, para nuestro país, sino también para otros países, que debemos luchar para llegar a esos espacios de poder como mujeres, porque dentro de las políticas gubernamentales también nuestra decisión es importante. Muchas veces como mujeres somos coartadas a la participación política dentro de nuestros países también. Por eso es que la mayoría de los gobiernos en el mundo entero son más hombres que mujeres. Si la mujer hace el esfuerzo de poder ser partícipe en la política, llega a mucho ser vicepresidenta, llega a mucho ser alcaldesa, llega mucho ser representante en las asambleas departamentales o nacionales, que son las cámaras de diputación y senado. Es muy importante y fundamental que el mundo patriarcal debe entender el espacio que hoy exigimos, no solamente desde este lugar, sino a nivel global, desde nuestros hogares, desde nuestras comunidades. Exigimos que el respeto de la igualdad tiene que ser ya, porque si no nos toman hoy en cuenta, más allá de que nosotros no esperamos que nos den financiamiento o que nos tomen en cuenta, nosotros ya estamos luchando contra el cambio climático. Nosotras ya estamos recibiendo el impacto de la crisis climática. El género en sí está sufriendo ya con el impacto desigual en los financiamientos de las financiaciones en el tema del cambio climático. Todos en conjunto deben entender nuestra posición, tienen que entender nuestros pedidos, y es muy lamentable hoy ser parte mínima de un espacio tan importante que es la COP, que es el espacio global donde podemos discutir cada país con nuestras posiciones, por supuesto, desde nuestras comunidades. Como mujer indígena, creo que es muy importante pedirles a cada una de ustedes que las alianzas y la unidad es fundamental. Tenemos que luchar de manera unida. Las mujeres como género tenemos que hacer dar cuenta al mundo entero de que se están olvidando lo más primordial, que somos nosotras, las mujeres, las madres, las hermanas, que día a día estamos luchando por una igualdad social en el tema de género y, por supuesto, buscando el financiamiento climático también.
Dirk, please continue.
Yes, a bit more technical again. It was the question of bringing in private sector and how to understand what I'm saying. I didn't say let's talk about privatization of development policy. That was not my topic. What I wanted to say is that the transformation, the transition is so expensive that we need a lot of money. We need money coming from the rich as well, because we have too much inequality in the world, so we have a debate, have to have a debate on that. But even before that, it is about how to bring in private sector actors who are based on the ideas of the green transition. And there are two measures where state can help. The state can help by broadening the contributors worldwide. That's hopefully happening with the loss and damage fund, for instance. But when it comes to private sector, I'm talking about, for instance, taxation systems, where even on the national basis, the state says, these investments are allowed, and these are the investments who are helping for the transformation. And the second is that very often guarantees should be necessary, so that there is a guarantee by public funds. And by that, the state is not giving out of his control the spending of the money, but giving it clear rules of how to spend the money. So it's not a contradiction, but it's trying to bring them together in a coherent way and fitting to the transition question.
Next question. Yes. Thank you.
Hello. Okay. It's really interesting that the panelists speak about a feminist, just transition. I think I'd like to highlight the fact that most of the discussions around climate finance is on debt. And we know that the debt climate fossil fuel is a trap, that it obstructs a feminist just transition. And we look into countries like Pakistan, like the Philippines, who's facing major climate disasters, and at the same time, still being given reparations, so to speak, reparations through loans to build up from the loss and damage. And of course, debt, it shrinks public fiscal space. I think the Mali colleague has spoken about how public fiscal space is important. Also, I wanted to ask some questions to the speakers with regards to regimes like ISDS, where research has shown that countries that cancel oil and gas projects could face substantial losses via ISDS. For example, in countries like Indonesia that has incurred around $3 to $4 billion in losses, which disincentivizes them to pursuing a rapid fossil fuel phase-out. And they are the country that has gotten a JETP partnership. Does the panelists believe that overhauling the ISDS regime is a precondition to enabling countries to pursue a feminist just transition? That would be my question. Thank you.
Could you articulate the acronym IPS?
IFPS.
ISDS is a mechanism, investor-state dispute settlement.
Okay, Gina, I'm going to ask you to take this one.
I am not knowledgeable about the mechanism that you have mentioned. Apologies for that. But I acknowledge your intervention in terms of debt and how we need to talk about debt justice when we talk about just transitions, and that is part of the just, and you nod. And I'm glad that you're nodding, because from my understanding, we are this year celebrating 70 years of what has been called the German economic miracle, in which part of the debt from the war was part of a debt relief for Germany, in which actually many southern countries vote to make that possible. But at the same time, in this moment, when countries are calling out for a cancellation of debt and illegitimate debt, because this debt has been caused as a result of colonialism, as a result of a notion of development. So when countries in the South are calling for debt cancellation, and now it is not allowed, now it is not part of the discussion. It is not something that countries are pushing for. To what the colleague is saying, allow countries to have that fiscal space to respond to the climate crisis and to build up those social protection infrastructures that are so heavily needed. And the example of Germany can as well tell us how that help to countries for that autodetermination, for start building their own communities, and to have that notion of what can we say, prosperity of progress. And this is something that we really need to be problematizing, discussing, and challenging, because this is what is blocking countries around the world, in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia Pacific. And this is not a matter of a political, insane decision to be taken, but it's something that has proof that works and that is needed. We need the political courage from governments to support, to show that cooperation. And in this time is something that goes beyond solidarity. This time we're talking about justice. Justice when it calls about debt cancellation.
The picture is sometimes a bit more differentiated, I would say. I think you're right when it comes to the question of debt and the question of debt regulation and things like that. I think there is still a big topic on the table, and we see that the debt crisis is one of the most serious ones. On the other hand, we see that it is not just the question of one side, it's also the question of sometimes political systems also in the countries itself and the governments of not good governance, to say, who are not playing fair too. So I wouldn't say that it's two-sided, but it's a bit more differentiated, and therefore when it comes, for instance, to broaden also the contributions for the solution, we have to talk about the role also of other countries like China, who also have something to say when it comes to debt and lifting the debt crisis. So it has to be a joint job we have to do. That's maybe just what I would like to add.
I'm going to make this the last question for now. Who has the best question? Oh, so much confidence. Oh dear, I'm conflicted. All right, I'm going to go here first and then here second. But our agreement is, it will be brief so I can get both of them in. Is that okay? All right, start here, then here. Hanno, help me out here. Yes. Do not give me 20-minute answers. Not looking at anyone in particular. Okay. Because we have a whole afternoon together as well, and there's going to be plenty more time for us to engage. And this is such a rich conversation. I'm just teasing, but also I need to get Gina a hot chocolate because it's freezing up here. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you so much. This is Ahmed from Egypt. I have a very brief question. Maybe this will allow us for future thinking about different aspects that I didn't hear here. The first, the space for the developed countries when working with the developing countries on the economic reform. How far is the space for creating incentives for the care economy as a fiscal stimulus, rather than holding solid development agendas? I think the care economy is one of the elements that we, as development practitioners, work effectively to include in our development plans. But here again, the development agenda between the developing countries and the developed countries needs a lot of working in this space. Second, which is linked to that as well,
Can I ask you only to ask one? So do you want your first or your second one answered?
It's actually related to that because when linking the care economy with the women with disabilities, this is really important element, and it's really actually absent in all discussions, which in the last 2 days, I'm hearing about the gender. The gender element, which is related and associated with the disability, needs a lot of focus. Thank you so much.
Kyra, do you have a brief response?
Yo considero que es importante cuando hablamos de el tema del desarrollo, desde la perspectiva de los trabajadores y las trabajadoras, tomando en consideración ese trabajo en alianza con comunidades, con movimientos sociales, movimientos ambientalistas. Y creo que lo fundamental en todo esto es justamente ver el nivel de responsabilidades. Y el nivel de responsabilidades sobre todo entre aquellos países desarrollados, donde muchas veces instalan sus empresas transnacionales en nuestros países en desarrollo, pero no bajo los mismos parámetros de responsabilidad que ellos se manejan dentro de sus propios países desarrollados. Justamente voy a hacer mención a un ejemplo para poder llevar un poco a colación, un poco de ejemplo de algo reciente. Yo soy panameña. Recientemente en Panamá se acaba de dar una situación con respecto a un movimiento popular de la población en contra de la extracción minera a cielo abierto. ¿Quiénes salen a la calle para la discusión del tema de que no queremos un Panamá con minas, a pesar de que es una actividad económica que se desarrolla en Panamá por más de 25 años? Pero hoy salen los gremios docentes, los obreros, las comunidades indígenas, las comunidades en general aledañas a donde está ubicada la mina, salen los movimientos juveniles, salen hombres y mujeres a la calle. Sale toda esa población a decir: queremos un Panamá verde, no queremos un Panamá con minas, a pesar de tener toda una advertencia justamente sobre el tema económico, sobre el tema de una posible sanción por un arbitraje internacional por el rompimiento de un contrato minero, porque se aprueba un contrato minero y se va a un tema de inconstitucionalidad de ese contrato. Hoy, a 4 días de declararse inconstitucional, luego de 38 días de lucha en la calle, donde hubo muertos, nos ponemos a pensar quiénes realmente trajeron a colación el tema si ya habían pasado 20 años. Pero es que nuestros pueblos, sean en vías de desarrollo o desarrollados, tienen que tener su propio proceso de desarrollo. Y es parte de lo que tenemos que establecer con el tema de cuál es la prioridad de la financiación. La financiación tiene que permitir el desarrollo de los pueblos directamente desde sus propios procesos internos, con algunos parámetros básicos de defensa que desde el movimiento sindical nosotros defendemos, que implica justicia ambiental, justicia de género, justicia laboral, justicia en cuanto al tema de la protección social. Hay algunos parámetros que consideramos fundamentales, pero no podemos permitir una agenda de ningún país de desarrollo hacia nuestros países que están en vías de desarrollo. Tiene que haber esa interacción de los movimientos sociales, trabajadores, feministas, ambientalistas, para poder definir lo que quieren dentro de su territorio. Entonces, esa es parte, creo que fundamental del tema de establecer cómo vamos a enfocar o a ver la financiación.
So, one more question for the Q&A for this part of our programme. We're all taking you to lunch. Lunch is going to be outside. So if you're rushing off to lunch, lunch is right here. Don't go anywhere. And then in the afternoon, we're all going to come back and we're going to be interactive. This is interesting, having an engaging conversation back and forth, having an uncomfortable conversation, as Gina would say, and it's not just about the temperature in the room, it's uncomfortable in terms of where do we stand on this issue. And then we are going to split up into groups, we are going to workshop and we're going to come up with recommendations. This is not I was going to call it an event, it's not an event, it's a technical workshop and you are part of it. Final question for this section. Go ahead, yes, thank you.
Okay. Bonjour, pour la parole, moi c'est Madame Biliga Koivogi, point focal genre et changement climatique en République de Guinée. Ma question, c'est comment mettre en place un mécanisme pour soutenir la mise en place de financement des activités des femmes au niveau national. Maintenant, si vous me permettez, au niveau de la Guinée, le ministère des Femmes vient de mettre en place une plateforme nationale sur la compétence féminine. Sur cette plateforme, que les femmes au niveau formel et informel s'inscrivent. Et c'est un outil d'aide à la décision pour diminuer un peu les inégalités entre les hommes et les femmes. Parlant des politiques, nous, au niveau national, on doit être regardant sur nos politiques. Parce que tout ce qu'on est en train de dire ici aujourd'hui, si nos politiques ne les prennent pas en compte, la mise en œuvre sera difficile pour nous. Donc, je ne fais que vous remercier pour ces belles initiatives. Merci.
Do you know, I feel like that is a statement about the difficulty of getting that financing at the national level. And I think you gave us that example, and it was a very clear one, so I thank you for that. I'm not going to ask the panel to respond because you gave us the example, and I appreciate you being part of this conversation. Dirk, Angelica, Gina, Cara, gracias. Thank you for spending time up here and having a conversation that helps us work on our technical workshop today. Really appreciate you very much indeed. If you're staying for the whole day, we appreciate you. If you're unable to stay for the whole day, thank you so much. And now we will move on with the rest of our program. Please take a seat on the floor. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Solo quiero terminar diciendo que de repente ya no voy a poder estar presente, solo quiero terminar diciendo la justicia climática, la justicia social de género son fundamentales para la humanidad. La transición justa para todos y todas también es un derecho. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We continue our program for the next 15 minutes. And I'm just going to ask for a show of hands for anybody who has been to a regional climate conference. Anybody? How many? Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. Oh, great. Good. Excellent, thank you. We are going to talk about 2 regional climate conferences, and I'm going to ask our speakers to come on stage because we would like to have them join us on stage. And then I'm going to ask them to go to the lectern so that they can do a little breakdown, but join me on stage first of all. So I'm going to ask Fatma Kafagi. Hello, Fatma. Arab State CSOs and Feminist Network co-founder. Fatma, welcome. Nice to have you. Please take a seat right by my side. And then also joining me on the podium, we have Mishi Singano. Hello, Mishi. Nice to see you. Welcome. Please come and sit right by me. In fact, you can sit here, Mishi. I really appreciate you doing that. I'm going to tell you for this afternoon, anyone who's thinking, oh, I can go somewhere else this afternoon. Well, you can't really, because Ms. Barbara Creasy, Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment Affairs for South Africa, will be kicking off our afternoon session, and she is a minister that is well worth you staying for and listening to. Okay, Mishi, are you ready to give us a rundown of what happened at the Regional Climate Conference? Would you like to do it at the lectern? You're very welcome to do it there.
I can do it here.
Oh, you do it here? Okay. Yes. All right, very good. Mishi, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself and tell us more about the Regional Climate Week you were a part of.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm ready. I think I've been born ready. As I've been introduced, my name is Mwanhamisi Singano, and I work with WIDU as Global Policy Lead. But also I coordinate our work around just transition on behalf of women in gender constituency, and I also serve as one of the members of the facilitative committee of the Women in Gender Constituency. As Gina said, Women in Gender Constituency is one of the official 9 constituency of the UNFCCC. So as Women in Gender Constituency, we really tried to walk the talk and practice what we preach in terms of being intersectional. So we understand that our experience change and our reality are different based on where you come from, the color of your skin, the social status, and the like. So we committed to use the Regional Climate Week to have specific dialogue in the region on what just transition means to women on that specific region, because we know the reality from Latin America may not be the same reality in Africa and vice versa. So in Africa, for example, when we hosted the regional week, which I attended on behalf of the Women in Gender Constituency, and we have almost more than 100 civil society, I must say, engaged in this dialogue, we are confronted with some of the realities in the region. One, what we have seen is, of course, the level of emission in Africa are lower, but the poverty level are high. We know that there is energy gap, specifically gender energy gap, while others regions are talking about decarbonizing and phasing out fossil fuel. In Africa, we are still talking about connecting communities to energy sources. For workforce is gendered, I think this can be across the board. So you have energy sector and all formal work, especially on energy and infrastructure, extremely male, and you have majority of women represented in informal and, for example, in agriculture, and that's changed the dynamics. We also knew that the leadership is the hands of the men, and this is the leadership in terms of the country governance leadership, but also leadership in the trade union is very much gendered. And the transition, for example, in education and in workforce from the science subject, so you have more women represented in social subject, and you have less transitioning to science and technology-based subject. And what we have learned, what is called as green job, they are very much gendered. So we have seen government saying we are rolling out green job and creating green opportunity, but for women, and if you ask them, they'll tell you that, oh, now we have women doing cleaning, or doing recycling, because that's the work that they have been doing. And that is part of the problem. So out of those reality, what came out as a definition of just transition, so we move from just transition and we want to call for gender just transition. And what it means is changing the system, because if you can see all this reality is interconnectedness of the system of oppression, which places women in a specific category. And the transition that we want to see is the transition from surviving the current system to thriving. So we no longer want to see women just being in a space where they just survive and to get ends meet. And because of that, we worked on what this then transition can look like, and we developed some key principles. And this is one, shifting power. We cannot have system where transition where power still lies in the dominant class, being it either men or being it multilateral cooperation or being it in the foreign government. And two, redistributive justice. If women used to work in a low-cadre job, we cannot say we are transitioning from, for example, a coal industry to renewable solar industry, but conditions for women work remain the same. Like, that is not a transition. And also freedom from gender-centered work. We cannot have a world where we have attained transition, where there is a clear gender division of who is doing what, especially when this job are undignified and in low cadre. And I think that transition really should value the should value the care work. And out of this, and my colleague Fatma will speak, we had the same consultation in the MENA region, we have the same consultation in the LAC region, and out of that we developed a brief, which I invite all of you to read. This is brief titled Gender Justice Transition, a Pathway to System Change. And this brief, one of the additional things that it gives apart from this analysis is also share some basic guidance to countries, especially when they are developing the gender justice transition program, so that we are not getting to replicating the same system of oppression, the same dignified work in the name of green job or in the name of justice transition. I'll yield back to my colleague to share what came out from MENA.
Fatma.
Thank you. I will talk about the MENA Feminist Task Force, which is actually now part of the Women, Gender, Climate constituency. And we've been very much concerned about, or trying to link also just transition with the situation of women in the world of work. Especially that, I mean, the region, the MENA region, actually is not a heterogeneous region. We have very rich oil-producing countries, and we have very poor countries as well. And also, we've been suffering from armed conflict for many decades now, which affect very much women and affect also the work of women. And we've started actually both at the national level and also at the regional level of identifying the main challenges that would keep women outside from the transition that the just transition we are aiming for. And we wanted actually to raise awareness about these challenges. We wanted also to have policymakers listen to us about it. We've identified actually many challenges, but we, because of time limit, I will just concentrate on two that we're very much addressing now, is the informality of the work of women in many of the countries of the region. And this has been very much affecting women in so many ways because, I mean, most of the work that women do, I mean, if we look at their participation in the formal labor market, it's only 27%, which is one of the lowest among all regions. But, I mean, it's been used very much, you know, against women, say, you know, women are not working, but they are working. Every woman actually is working, but we're not counting this. So this is very important actually to have statistics, and especially gender disaggregated statistics about the work of women. They work in so many sectors. They work in agriculture, they work in urban areas, they work in the unpaid care economy, but all this work is not at all counted and is not recognized even for women. And this is something that we very much, because of the climate change, it's going to affect. We need actually an equitable female supply, labor supply, which does not exist because we don't know much about it, first of all, and because these women in the informal sector, they're working under very severe conditions, I mean, very little pay. Also, I mean, they're not covered in many cases by any social security or protection or health insurance. So if we're talking about, you know, new sectors that are going to be created, we're talking about, you know, jobs that are going to be lost, and we're talking about green economy and all that. How can women be included if they're not really, if we don't know anything about it? The second, also very important challenge is that women in many cases, and because of the nature of the work they do, are not, their voice is not heard. They're not in trade unions, they're not in labor unions, they're not in syndicates. So, I mean, things are really started changing very much, but I mean, there is no decision that they can take. I mean, women, for instance, in the region, they do like 60% of the agriculture work, but I mean, now because of the floods, because of the drought, because of so many things, they have to change quickly from, you know, the crop mix to you know, new crops. They have to change the fertilizers. They have to do so many things, but they, I mean, they're not really helped because they cannot really voice this in any organized organization. So the idea of really having women be able also to express their needs, also to be, I mean, supported in all that transition is very much needed. So, I mean, I'll stop here and happy to answer any question.
Let's talk about impact. I'm really curious about the MENA region and also the Africa Regional Climate Week. What has the impact been? Is it too soon to tell? Misha, you start.
I think specifically, for example, for Africa Climate Week, it was uniquely different because of the first Africa Summit. So there was a lot of high-level participation and media engagement, and I think that helped to create conversation in the region around the importance of climate change and how climate change should center the policy work. But again, because of that,
yeah, if I may, a lot of attention is an understatement. Like Nairobi Airport was like, how did you even get in? How did you get your visa? The visa system collapsed. There was sheer excitement and joy. It was almost as if, dare I say this, the Africa Climate Summit was more important to Africa than COP27.
Yes, yeah. I think that's correct. Like, because for so long, for the longest time, the Africans were calling for Africans to convene themselves in their land to discuss their agenda. So there was a lot of excitement around the Africa Climate Week and the high levelness of it. So which was important. But I think for us who have organized, especially from the civil society, that will also mean that, because there is a limit of how many people can fit in the room. So that means that a lot of our conversation was done outside because there was no space inside. And we used that opportunity to create, to have this conversation of what this really means. And I think the conversation is specifically around gender-adjusted transition and the transition, especially in the continent like Africa, where we are not in the same level of the conversation as it has been shared on the, transitioning from the energy, high carbon energy to renewable energy. Is a conversation that's really need us to center the life and realities of our communities. And I think we did manage to have that conversation. The extent to which that conversation will now, those dialogue and conversation will now come to this space to translate to policy, to translate to work program in terms of what has been discussed, for example, in work program, on just transition work program, is all for the parties now to take that in, because the communities and realities are different. So for us, it was important to share this reality to parties so that they can take that reality and potentially invite them to host this conversation and dialogue in their community as well, and have concrete ideas on what just transition should mean, what just transition program should look like. And when government are designing education policy, for example, I had a chat with one of the or the negotiator during the climate week, and I was saying to them, we cannot say we want to transit while we are still teaching our young people in the university how to extract coal. Possibly the curriculum has to change now. We have to have solar engineers rather than, so that means things have to change holistically. And that's why to us it's important to center this conversation in the system change and have holistic approach. For those who are not in the workplace, it doesn't mean that they should not transit. But they need to transit from, if you have been excluded, how can we have the system that now is included? And that's why the basic or the tagline for us is transitioning from surviving and deprivation to thriving, because we do believe everyone in this planet Earth have a right to live a dignified life, center well-being of the people, and more importantly, the health of the planet.
Fatma, impact of the MENA Regional Climate Week, what would you say it was or has been?
Actually, the participation of youth, that was really a very good impact. They feel that this is their issue, actually, and they, holding everybody accountable, which is very good. We are the ones that, you've damaged the environment for us, and you are accountable for that. So we are the ones that will be here, will be the ones contributing to all decisions that are going to be made. And this was true for female youth and male youth. So I think this is a very good, impact that has happened. Also the issue, because we also started by very little information about climate change and how it affects women in our region. Now, no, women are demanding, we are the ones who are going to be, affected even more, and we need the decision. It's not anymore a scientific issue. Now it's an economic, it's a social, and it's a political issue, and we are into it. So I think the urge, the perseverance, the insistence that this is our issue, and we are in it, and we are going to take decisions in it.
Thank you for reporting back on the MENA and also the Africa Regional Climate Weeks. Really appreciate you very much indeed. So, UNFCCC and ILO are going to take you all to lunch. You don't have to go far because lunch is just outside of the door. Our programme will continue at 1400 hours, and we will continue to look at delivering a gender-responsive just transition for all. We are going to break out into groups. We are going to work through some solutions, some ideas, and bring those ideas back to the ILO and the UNFCCC in this mandated workshop. We have a lot to do, but you can't do it on an empty stomach. So I'm going to break for lunch now. I'm also going to tell you, do not leave anything in this room, because being COP28, they're going to be using this room in half an hour's time, actually 20 minutes time. So anything you have, take it with you, take it out of this room, and then we will reconvene at 1400 hours. And then that will be where Miss Barbara Creasy, Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment Affairs in South Africa, will start off our afternoon. Enjoy lunch. I will see you in a little bit. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mushi. Thank you so much, Fatma.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.